Welcome back to Ask Rusty Law, where we break down the legal issues that matter to you. I'm Rusty Messer with Big River Trial Attorneys, and today we're talking about a topic that affects thousands of construction workers and industrial workers every year, and that is injuries caused by scaffolding. So scaffolding is an essential part of construction work. It lets workers reach heights and complete projects safely. But when scaffolding isn't properly installed, maintained, or inspected, the consequences can be devastating, even fatal. So today, we'll discuss the three most common types of scaffolding accidents, what OSHA regulations require, and importantly, what legal options you have beyond workers' compensation claims. Let's start by looking at the three main categories of scaffolding accidents that result in serious injuries or death. So the first type are falls. Falls from scaffolding are by far the most common and deadly type of scaffolding accident. So workers can fall from scaffolding for numerous reasons. Could be missing guardrails, an inadequate fall protection system, or unstable platform, or just simply losing their balance on an improperly secured structure. Even a fall from 10 or 15 feet can result in life-altering injuries, including a traumatic brain injury, spinal cord damage, broken bones, or other internal injuries. So falls from greater heights are often fatal. The second type are scaffolding collapse. So this happens when the entire structure fails, often due to improper assembly, or maybe overloading, or maybe it was on an unstable foundation, or there were some defective components in the scaffolding. When scaffolding collapses, workers can be thrown to the ground or crushed by falling materials and equipment. So these incidents typically involve multiple victims and catastrophic injuries. So we've seen some tragic examples of this recently that I'm going to discuss in a moment. And the third type that we want to talk about are falling objects. So objects falling from scaffolding onto workers below. This could be tools, equipment, building materials, or maybe debris. So this comes from elevated scaffolding, and it strikes workers on lower levels or on the ground. And even a relatively small object falling from a height can cause a serious head injury or fractures or death. This is why OSHA regulations require specific protections like toe boards and screening. Now let's talk about what the law requires. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has comprehensive regulations governing scaffolding safety under 29 CFR 1926.451. Right? So these regulations exist to prevent exactly the kinds of accidents we just discussed. So first, scaffolding must be designed to support its own weight plus at least 4 times the maximum intended load. This is not a suggestion. It's a mandatory safety margin built into the regulations. Scaffolds must be designed by a qualified person and constructed according to that design. OSHA regulations require that scaffolding platforms be fully planked or decked with minimal gaps between platform units. So platforms generally must be at least 18 inches wide, though there are specific exceptions for certain types of scaffolds. And the platform cannot be more than 14 inches from the worker's face unless additional protection is provided. Now, for a supported scaffold, those resting on the ground or some kind of a structure, OSHA mandates that scaffolds with a height to base ratio greater than 4:1 must be restrained from tipping. So this is done by using ties or braces or some other means to keep it from falling over. The scaffold should sit on a proper base plate and footing that are level and rigid. So posts, legs, and frames need to be plumb, and they need to be properly braced. So let's talk about fall protection, because this is critical. Every employee on a scaffolding more than 10 feet above a lower level must be protected from falling. And depending on the type of scaffold, this protection could include maybe a personal fall arrest system, a guardrail system, or it could be both. So guardrails meet specific height and strength requirements, with top rails generally between 38 and 45 inches high for modern scaffolds. So let's talk about access requirements. Workers must have a safe access to the scaffolding. So when the platforms are more than 2 feet above the ground or below a point of access, you have to have a proper ladder, stairways, or some other safe method to get onto the scaffolding. Cross braces cannot be used as a means of access. That is explicitly prohibited. Now let's talk about falling object protection. So to prevent what are called struck-by injuries, OSHA requires additional protection when there's a danger of objects falling from the scaffolds. So this can include toe boards at least 3.5 inches high. It can be a screening in the guardrail system or some sort of canopy structure below the scaffold. The area below has to be barricaded if adequate overhead protection isn't provided. This is to keep people from walking into the area. So let's talk about the inspection by a competent person. So scaffolds must be inspected by a competent person before each work shift and after any occurrence that could affect structural integrity. Those scaffolds have to be erected, moved, or dismantled only under supervision of a competent person, and this is somebody who has been trained in qualified scaffold operations, right? Any damaged components have to be immediately repaired or removed from service. And the competent person, again, is somebody with training, not just somebody hanging around the job site. Let's look at some of the real-world cases. So these regulations exist because scaffolding accidents caused real harm to real people. Let me share 2 recent examples that illustrate just how serious these types of accidents can be. So first, we're going to talk about the Port Arthur LNG collapse in April of 2025. This was a tragic scaffolding collapse. It occurred at the Port Arthur LNG construction site in Sabine Pass, Texas. 3 workers lost their lives when a tank jump form scaffolding system failed while they were working at an elevation. 2 other workers were seriously injured. So the families filed wrongful death lawsuits seeking millions of dollars in damages. They alleged multiple safety failures, including failure to provide safe scaffolding and failure to provide scaffolding that was constructed by qualified personnel, a failure to adequately warn of the dangers, and rushing the operation and failing to properly train and supervise the employees. So this was not just a workers' compensation case. The families pursued third-party claims against the contractors and the energy companies involved in the project. Now, let's talk about the Brock Industrial Services case earlier in 2025. So in 2025, a Louisiana jury awarded $411 million to a 28-year-old Texas man who suffered catastrophic injuries when a 20-pound metal scaffolding bar fell and struck him on the head while he was working at a Phillips 66 refinery. Despite wearing a hard hat, the gentleman sustained severe spinal and brain injuries that left him confined to a wheelchair and barely able to speak. So this verdict is believed to be the largest single plaintiff personal injury award in Louisiana history. And it came after the scaffolding company and its insurers refused to settle the case even within the limits of their insurance policy. So I don't think the company is just going to roll over and pay. So the jury found that the scaffold company's conduct was certain to cause injury, going beyond mere negligence. Now let's talk about third-party claims beyond workers' compensation. And here's something critical that many injured workers and their families don't realize. You may have legal options beyond a workers' compensation claim. So workers' compensation typically covers your employer, the company that directly employs you and pays your wages. But in scaffolding cases, there are often parties involved who may bear responsibility for your injuries. These are called third-party claims. So who could be a third party that is responsible for the injuries? So one is the scaffold contractor, or the company that installed or erected or maintained the scaffolding. If you work for one company, but a different company set up the scaffold that failed, that scaffold company may be liable. So another party could be equipment manufacturers. So if there was defective scaffold components that caused the failure, now you're looking at the people that made those components. The general contractors are the project owners who control the worksite and may have failed to ensure proper safety measures. Right? So if you're working with one company at another facility, that facility could be a third-party defendant. Engineering or design firms, if the scaffolding was improperly designed. Employees of other subcontractors, if the employees from another company caused the accident. And third-party claims are crucial because they allow you to recover damages that workers' compensation doesn't cover. While workers' compensation provides medical benefits and a partial wage replacement, there's a lot of things that it doesn't pay for. It doesn't compensate for pain and suffering. Workers' compensation doesn't compensate for loss and enjoyment of life, full loss of earning capacity, punitive damages in the case of gross negligence. In going back to the Port Arthur LNG case and the Brock Industrial case, both demonstrated how families pursued third-party liability claims against contractors and against third-party companies beyond just a direct employer, so that they were able to get damages outside of workers' compensation. So these claims allowed them to seek full compensation for the devastating losses caused by the scaffolding failures. So what do you do if you are injured? So if you or a loved one has been injured in a scaffolding accident, here's what you need to know. First, seek immediate medical attention. Your health is a priority, and prompt medical care also creates important documentation of your injuries. Second, report the incident to your employer and file for workers' compensation benefits. This typically covers your medical treatment and provides some wage replacement, and you should absolutely pursue those benefits. Third, and this is important, consult with an experienced personal injury attorney who can evaluate whether you have potential third-party claims. Don't assume that workers' compensation is your only option. Don't assume that workers' compensation is looking out for the third-party claims that you might have. An attorney can investigate who installed the scaffolding, who was responsible for inspecting it, whether OSHA violations occurred, and whether other parties share liability for your injuries. The scaffold company, the general contractor, or the equipment manufacturer, any of those may have violated OSHA regulations. They may have been grossly negligent in their duties, and these third-party claims can provide you full compensation, the compensation you deserve for these life-altering injuries. So scaffolding accidents devastate lives. Whether it's a fall, a collapse, or a struck-by incident, these accidents often result in permanent disabilities or death. OSHA regulations exist to prevent these tragedies, but when companies cut corners or they fail to follow basic safety requirements, workers pay the price. Remember, if you're injured in a scaffolding accident, you may have claims beyond workers' compensation. And these third-party liability claims can hold negligent contractors and companies accountable and provide you with full compensation for your losses. If you have questions about a scaffolding injury case, don't hesitate to reach out to Big River Trial Attorneys. We're here to help, or a local experienced injury attorney near you. You should definitely speak with someone. So I'm Rusty Messer with Big River Trial Attorneys. Thanks again for listening to Ask Rusty Law. Stay safe out there. Stay informed. If you found this episode useful, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and remember that you have rights. The first step is knowing your rights before you can protect those rights.